had a very long day and about 10 of these. I don't know how you do it.
I don't know how they do it. All right, you are good to go.
Okay, we're live from Millinocket, Maine. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for coming on a rainy Tuesday night. It's 60 something degrees here as opposed to 87 yesterday, so go figure. Some of you are coming remotely from New York or California or Sweden, which is fantastic. And this will be recorded so you can share it with someone. We can send you the link afterwards if you want to. I'll be answering questions after I read from my latest unpublished novel, which is called You May See a Stranger. And it hasn't found a publisher yet, but it's out showing some ankle and being considered. Hi, are you here for the reading? Come on in. Maybe tonight will bring me some luck. Come on, join us. Hi, good to see you. My great thanks to the Millinocket Memorial Library and their fantastic staff, Diana Furukawa, Nicole Brennan, who's moderating tonight, and Heather Hurley, who've helped with this reading and also with last summer's. And they've made the library such a hub of information, enlightenment, and joy for this community. When I first came to Millinocket and saw the sign, I love my library in all the windows, I knew this was the town for me. It was the end of my search for a quiet place where I could immerse myself in writing projects. So I just want to give you a little bit about myself to give you context for the reading. I grew up in very modest rentals in the artsy and progressive bohemian part of New York City called Greenwich Village, loaded with bookstores, indie movie houses, and cafes. This was way before the influx of celebrities, lawyers, and stockbrokers. The Salvation Army was where I got most of my school clothes, and White Tower hamburgers were cheap. My brother once said, when I asked him, what class was our family, our weird family? Were we middle class or poor or working class? And he said, we were upper poor. So I think that's a good category because Greenwich Village was a very diverse, inclusive community. And nobody really talked about class. But when I went to college later, people were always talking about middle class or working class. And my family just didn't fit into any clear category. So I'll take upper poor, I'll take that one. It was a time when latchkey kids like myself could roam around after school unmonitored by non-existent cell phones. Be home by 6, that was the rule for dinner. I was a child of divorce. Back then they called it being from a broken home. Nice, right? Cue 20 years of psychotherapy, right? Broken home. My multi-talented, if neurotic mother worked as an editor for McCall's magazine. That was a pretty big deal at the time. And she worked on movie scripts at night. Thanks to the internet, Mary Madeline Lanfier, a good French-Canadian name by way of Omaha, Nebraska, now has some credits on Internet Movie Database. No money to speak of from these efforts, but her name will be there forever. I wish she could know this, because she thought everything she did just disappeared. My dad, who is Oklahoma born, was trained as an electrical engineer at Purdue and lived only a few blocks from us. He spent many weekends taking me to museums, Broadway plays like South Pacific, and you guessed it, Oklahoma, right? Where the corn is as high as an elephant's eye, right? I used to sing that to myself. Ice skating, and he sent me several summers to camp on the shore of Lake Winnipesaukee. On the back of my book, you can see me at Lake Winnipesaukee, where I learned to ride horses, swim, and use a bow and arrow. Now, ouch to the inner elbow if you've ever used a bow and arrow. The leather cuff does not protect you if you have the kind of elbow that sticks out, so it can be painful learning, but it was fun. I like bows and arrows. And New Hampshire is where I first fell in love with the scent of balsam fir pine needles. They both encouraged me to dream big about my future. And looking back, I now think I grew up with a sort of gender privilege or gender blinkers. That is, it never occurred to me that being female would limit my life choices in any way. Just didn't occur to me. So I went off to Reed College in Oregon at 16, determined that I would be able to combine my two great passions, science and writing. I do genetics research during the day and write my novels at night, as if. When at 28, I realized I would not be able to pursue those two professions at the level I desired, I had to choose. So after successfully defending my doctorate in biochemistry at Brandeis, I turned down a postgrad research fellowship, and I spent 2 years in London testing out my commitment to writing. And I started what became my published coming-of-age novel, The Girl Pretending to Read Rilke. This library has it, and I have a few copies with me, actually. I knew I'd made the right decision to forego a lifetime at the lab bench, though I do recommend basic science research to women as an incredibly fulfilling pursuit. But I feel that whatever research I would have undertaken, someone else almost certainly would have done and done well. My special interest was epigenetics. However, only I can write my novels, good, bad, or somewhere in between. That became very important to me. Now, my writing efforts, if there's a theme, are centered on telling the stories of women as entertainingly and truthfully as I can. I want to smash stereotypes and show aspects of our lives, inner and outer, that I haven't seen portrayed as honestly as we deserve. That's rapidly changing, thank goodness. A lot of good young female writers out there, and older too. But when I was really seriously first working, there weren't that many contemporary female role models for writing honestly about women, as opposed to romance novels. So let's celebrate our strengths and our resilience, our failures and successes. Let's learn from our horrible mistakes by sharing them and helping each other to move on. And best of all, let's laugh at our foolish choices. We've all been there. My narrators aren't exactly me, but I am very familiar with the details of their lives. I might resurrect a long-dead mother to meet a character's ex-husband if it serves the story and a greater truth. So what if they never met in reality? What if they had? I want, by sharing with brutal frankness, sometimes people say my writing is a little too tough, but I want to be truthful. I want to empower younger and older women to claim their lives and make choices to live authentically, to follow their own truths wherever that might lead. It might lead to an abortion at 18, a divorce or a mad love affair at 40, an impulsive move to a small rural town in central Maine in your 70s. Who would that be? Life is nothing if not unpredictable and challenging. Live while you're alive. Okay, so that's me. Well, questions later, I'll be glad to answer any questions. So I'm going to read some selections from my current novel, which is out at 2 publishers right now. I spent 5 years writing it. Marketing and finding agents and publishers is a whole other endeavor from writing. I hate it, but you have to do it. But I love the writing part. So it's a real pleasure to be able to share something that I worked so hard on, that I believe in, and that I'm, knocking on all those doors. So it's great to have people listening. Thank you so much for coming. So the title, You May See a Stranger, might give you an echo from South Pacific. Some enchanted evening, you may see a stranger across a crowded room, and somehow you'll know, well, my mother loved that song. She used to sing it while she was doing the dishes. And that's kind of how she lived her life, that the magic thing could happen at any moment, and that can be really frustrating if you're 12 and you just want a good dinner on the table, or new sneakers. But now I really appreciate that optimism that she had, and that sense that anything wonderful could happen. So anyway, it's not a great rule to live by, but I appreciate it in retrospect. So the novel is kind of a woman who's haunted by this undercurrent that the wonderful thing could happen at any moment, and maybe it's happening right now, and this is it, and then what happens? Okay. So Cait Harnell is the heroine, and she's sort of having a midlife crisis. She's in her 40s, living in New Jersey, in a relationship where the professor boyfriend won't commit to marriage. She wants to get remarried. She has a little boy, and into her life comes this person referred to her by her sister, who's living in Sweden. He's a Czech émigré filmmaker. Okay. What did Cait Harnell know about Russians? Anna Karenina, Sputnik, the arms race, all the boys in her junior high school class suddenly wanting to be engineers, ban the bomb, Cuban missiles, a fat bald man with a big wart on his chin pounding his shoe on a kitchen counter. That was about the sum of her knowledge before she met Tonda, the intense Czech filmmaker who just happened to call her when she was reading that novel by Kundera. You know, the one about the 1968 Prague spring, when the hopes of Czechs had been smashed to bits by their Russian brothers. You probably saw the movie. Makes for very photogenic subject matter, Czech history does. And now a real live Czech had swaggered right into her life, courtesy of her sister Magda. Funny how the Russians are current again, right? I finished this 5 years ago. Standing behind Tonda as he energetically swabbed out the ancient stovetop espresso pot, his dark curls flopping about and the obviously brand new polo shirt tied across his chest, the fold line still visible, Cait felt a lift, a sense of buoyancy. When you realize you're not going to drown after all, rather that the threatening wave is actually going to toss you onto the shore. The sunlight in the kitchen seemed painfully bright. She hadn't even realized up to now that she'd been depressed. It was for this that she'd been waiting since April. This was what was missing from her life. How her present life with Adam would end, how she would leave this house that had never been hers, she didn't know, just that it would happen. Cait would never dare compare herself to Madame Bovary. No way, Jose. She wasn't in debt and she wasn't having an affair. But this rural life in small town New Jersey as a professor's live-in girlfriend was an experiment that had failed. The reality had to be faced. She was 39 and a half and still had not been able to twist her life into the right shape to fulfill her purpose. To even find her purpose beyond raising her son. Life with Adam in his old house on the shore of an only slightly polluted river in New Jersey had promised some stability. She'd fooled herself, overlooking clues. But now was the time to act, to move into the wild and unknown future before her. Her new life would soon begin, before she turned 40, with this virtual stranger who was now pouring strong coffee into the large white mugs on the little table overlooking the uncut and neglected lawn. She had begged the universe for a stroke of luck, and here it was. She picked up her mug with a shaking hand. It was shocking to think that only 4 days ago, this piece of good fortune, long overdue, had only been a melodious Czech accent on an answering machine message. 7 years later, I can laugh now, 7 years later, Prague, April 1990. This was 1983. Cait tentatively approaches the fledgling kestrel that has fallen from its nest onto the plaza in front of the shuttered government building. Her husband, Tonda, is behind her, irritated. They all think we're American idiots. Cait, we cannot do this. Cait persists. She pulls out of her shoulder bag an embroidered linen handkerchief that Tonda's mother had given to her yesterday, a memento of Tonda's baptism in Prague 50 years ago. Gently, she scoops the baby bird into it and closes her hand halfway round. The bird's beak opens and closes, revealing a forked tongue. It is hissing fiercely. Somehow it reminds her of Tonda himself, and she suppresses a giggle. Okay, let's go. I got him. Jesus Christ! Tonda turns back to the idling taxi, excruciatingly aware of all the eyes upon them. This was not the hero's return he had imagined. High up, barely visible above the pillars, wedged among the ornate pseudo-Greek 19th century ornamentation, Cait catches a last glimpse of the baby bird's erstwhile home, a mass of twigs, dried grass, and torn candy wrappers. A few idling Russian soldiers are smoking nearby, standing watch over the blankets on which their medals are spread. Victims of the Velvet Revolution, they tell each other. Nobody cares about them. Both the Czechs and the Russians want them to disappear from the face of the earth. They have priced the medals to sell cheap to the tourists who are just beginning to make it to Prague. Every koruna in their pockets is one step towards not having to return to Moscow. Of the two choices, going back is worse. Here, there's freedom, beautiful women, good beer. Jobs will come somehow. They're young, healthy. A taxi lurks hopefully nearby, the motor running, its driver watching Cait's every move. Her bright yellow tights are the same color as the forsythia that have burst into flower everywhere. Her legs aren't half bad for a woman in her 40s. The taxi driver thinks about his uncle in Queens, New York, who left for America in the 50s, or rather peeled from his visiting basketball team and stayed. Lucky man. The driver had wagered with himself that there was a 50% chance the man would step on the baby bird, accidentally on purpose, as they say. If he did, the driver would consider it a win and reward himself by quitting for the day and having an early beer before returning home. He upped the chance to 75% yes for one or the other of these idiots to do the deed. Then he heard a sharp cry and saw the woman dart towards the infant kestrel, now peeping mournfully for its mama. Damn, he's lost his self-wager. Still, he's mesmerized by these strangers and awaits their next move. The woman scoops the fledgling up in the handkerchief and turns to her companion. They have an energetic discussion. It ends with the man motioning to the taxi driver, who's directed to take them to the old city zoo on the other side of the Charles River, the blighted side, where Soviet-style apartment blocks built in the 60s have polluted the cityscape for miles. The man says he remembers the zoo from his youth, just barely. Ah, an expat. The strangers plan to entrust the precious infant kestrel to a bird sanctuary and hope it will not end up on the zookeeper's dinner plate. Good luck with that. As he shifts gears and heads out from the old town into the ugly modern suburbs, the driver shakes his head. Now he knows for sure. American women really are crazy. To spend taxi fare on saving a baby bird? The whole country is in disarray. It's not even certain the Russian scum will be leaving. The headlines scream of an oil blockade, déjà vu, right? And possible intervention. Gangs of teenagers are roving, uncertain of the future or their next meal. And she wants to save a bird? Okay, but what about her husband? One of those Czechs who left in '68. Now he thinks he can just show up and fit in after the real patriots have reclaimed their country. Show up and show off, hire a taxi on a fool's errand. Well, they better pay him in cash. If he's lucky, he'll get dollars. Dollars, he will insist. Dollars. Tonight, his wife will be happy when he shows up with sausages and beer. And tomorrow? Tomorrow is tomorrow. So, Tonda and Cait have gone back to Prague after the Velvet Revolution, when the Soviet Empire collapsed in 1989 and all the different countries resumed and most became democracies. Now it's in turmoil again, but Tonda was invited to show his film, the film he made in exile, at a big film festival where all the Czech filmmakers who had been dispersed around the world were invited to come back, and they were now again free to show their movies in their own country. So they do that. This is like a week after the incident with the bird. And as you can imagine, it's very fraught because we have people, the Czechs who stayed, many of them lost their jobs, professors became garbage men. They stayed and suffered, and now they were again able to do what they had been trained to do. And the Czechs who came from abroad weren't exactly welcome because they had left and now were coming back, but the ones who left didn't quite trust the ones who'd stayed because they thought, well, maybe they were collaborators. So it was very complicated. It was the big night, the reason they had come. Native-born Czech filmmakers who'd been in exile, scattered all over the world, were now together for the first time in 40 years in the celebrated Great Hall of Karlovy Vary to celebrate the resumption of a film festival run by and for artists who would once again be able to work without censorship in their own country. Renowned for its curative mineral waters, Cait learned, the small spa town known as Carlsbad at one point in its long history was a powerful symbol for the many old-timers who had outlived both the Nazis and the communists. Emotions were running high. She herself had pulsed with emotion at the sight of President Havel's motorcade when it passed them earlier in the day, tiny Czech flags flying. Only a madman would ever have dreamed that the rogue activist and playwright Václav Havel would become president of the new democracy. But here he was. The only jarring note of the day was Tonda's snarl as they passed the larger-than-life-size statue of Russian astronaut Yuri Gagarin in his helmet and spacesuit, incongruously erected right next to the Victorian Pavilion for sampling the mineral waters of the spa. That must come down soon, muttered Tonda as he stomped past. Bastards. The previous evening, the expatriate director Milos Forman, who had now lived in Connecticut, had arrived before the screenings on a motorcycle, smoking a cigar. It was rumored he had driven all the way from Paris. Dramatic was the only word for his late evening entrance, as he dismounted in front of that elegant neo-Gothic confection, the Grand Hotel Poupe. The brightly lit entrance silhouetted him in all his black Viking leather glory for all the onlookers as the whisper went around, "It's Foreman! It's Foreman!" The crowd pulsed with long-deferred energy and affection for its native son, its hugely successful native son, who was now back home, sharing his glory with them. The communal thrill pulsed through Cait, and she strained for a better look, but Tonda just pulled her away toward their ugly Soviet-era modern hotel, the only ugly building in town, with accommodations arranged by their festival hosts. Of Tonda's generation, Milos Forman had achieved everything Tonda had only dreamed of in the United States. He couldn't spare to spend a second looking at Forman and his adoring fans. There was most likely not going to be a repeat of that particular Czech-American dream. Now they were sitting among hundreds of fellow expatriates from all over the world. By the time the lights came up after the screening of Gregor's Story, Tonda's film, he was pale and fidgety. He was mumbling to Cait in English. Kafka never wanted a film version. He said so many times, "They will boo me off the stage. The Swedes pushed me into it." Cait kept a tight grip on his hand, and then they heard his name called. She dropped his hand after giving him an encouraging squeeze, which he did not return. He pushed himself up and moved out of his seat like a well-dressed zombie, not looking back at her. On stage, a very young actress, sporting a jagged red haircut and seemingly funneled into her minuscule black dress, handed an enormous bouquet of long-stemmed red roses to Tonda. He stared out at the crowd, many of whom were his former classmates from 30 years ago. "Hi, come on." After he stammered a few words in Czech that Cait didn't understand, he brought his heels sharply together in that odd way he sometimes had, bowed from the waist, "Hiya," and was led away by the red-haired vamp, who was fiercely hoping to be discovered by a famous director tonight, and had probably never heard of Franz Kafka, and could care less whether a film about a giant cockroach had been made, whether by Tonda or Walt Disney. Tonda, the roses in his grip now upended and dragging on the floor, waited by the exit sign and motioned to Cait with his free hand. She clambered awkwardly past the knees in her row while the lights darkened for the next film. I must lie down. Please take me to our room now. Perspiration dripped from his chin and he was trembling. His knees were unsteady, and Cait, for the first time, wondered whether coming here was the right decision. Just to back up, and my characters are at a film festival in the Czech Republic right after the revolution when the Czechs took their country back. And this expatriate film director is at a showing of the film he made in exile, but he's super nervous about it and he's freaking out and his wife is trying to calm him down. Okay. The next morning he was worse. Tonda had read a copy of the Karlovy Vary Festival newsletter that was printed at night and put under their door first thing every day. Someone had anonymously accused Tonda of plagiarizing another director's screenplay of the Kafka story. Cait insisted on an explanation. Is there any truth to it? Did you? I read it, sure. He sent it for my opinion, but my version is different, very different. Cait felt sick. The aspect of Tonda that made her forgive all his difficult quirks, that he was a true artist, were under attack. Maybe he was a fake and a cheater, but now was the chance to fight back and defend himself among his peers. She would stand by him. She looked around to reassure him of her loyal support in the face of this ugly attack, but he was tossing socks and underwear into his battered old suitcase. It was the one he'd arrived in New York City with 7 years ago. Thrifty he certainly was. Behind him, the red roses were reflected in the incongruous antique mirror above the cheap formica top dresser. Dimly glowing behind the roses in the same mirror, the wedding cake houses climbed the hillside across the piazza from their window, mocking their Soviet-era hotel room. Tonda moved quickly and forcefully around the room, grabbing newspapers, books, sweaters, eyeglass cases. We leave today. Pack everything. I have no need to defend myself, not to anyone. This is no longer a dictatorship. I am a free man. But you aren't just going to let those rumors. We leave in 1 hour. I have managed a car ride for us back to Prague. We will share the gas costs with the driver. Cait packed in silence. Everything was cracking open, shattering. She didn't know what to do. Yeah, everybody with me? So they struggle on, they get through that. He never explains it. He just says they were wrong and she can't get him to talk about it at all. She buries all her doubts about it. And they're trying, their marriage is basically floundering, but they managed to buy a little apartment in Prague and they're fixing it up. And she's trying to keep the marriage together. She thought after he got his country back, that was his main problem, that, you know, that the Russians had taken, but that didn't seem to solve it. But they're trying. So they have this little apartment in Prague. And they're living there back and forth between the Czech Republic and America. After doing 4 loads of laundry down the street, they decided to make the trip to Prague's first IKEA out in the suburbs. It seemed as if the superstore had set off a wave of madness. Now you could find genuine Art Nouveau furniture in flea markets and charity thrift shops for almost nothing. People were heedlessly dumping their family heirlooms, desperate to become modern as quickly as possible. On their first excursion to the shop a few blocks away, Cait and Tonda had already found 2 shockingly cheap 1920s Bentwood Cafe chairs and an oak armoire with leaded glass windows and the original brass hardware. But for practical and stylish kitchen and bathroom odds and ends, IKEA was the only place to go. Even Cait had to concede that much. The instant she entered the vast, artificially bright warehouse, Cait remembered why she hated IKEA. Too large, no air, not enough exit signs. And hadn't she read somewhere that they use East German political prisoners as a source of labor for some of their goods before the fall of the Berlin Wall? Still, they were here. They would zip in and out. She rushed ahead of Tonda to the inner reaches of this superstore set in the industrial outskirts of Prague, madly zooming through an unending maze of impeccably furnished rooms, lightheaded from the effort not to inhale the fumes of stain-proofed cotton and polyester batting. Finally, she reached the kitchen basics area, and she found the storage unit she coveted, a kind of file cabinet-sized set of sliding baskets in a frame on wheels. It was hanging on a display wall from a large hook, and the display space down below, where the unit should be, was depleted, sadly empty, only a wisp of sawdust in sight. As Tonda glowered behind her, Cait reached up and grabbed the unit off the hook with a little upward jerk and flung it into her shopping cart. A pale young IKEA clerk with a metal stud piercing one eyebrow spotted Cait and began chasing her through the aisles, shouting rapid Czech phrases, which Tonda translated as, "Madam, that display sample is not for sale. You must immediately put it back." Tell him, I only speak English. I am buying this thing no matter what, and then we are getting the fuck out of here. Tell him I'm an insane American and that I am armed. Tell him I am ex-CIA. Tonda muttered something to the clerk, who quickly dropped back and hid behind a shower curtain display. At the checkout counter, one of 5, a small crowd began to gather behind her, looking forward to the confrontation they sensed was about to occur. Cait plunked the storage unit on the counter and shoved her credit card into the slot. The confused cashier looked from Cait to the cluster of onlookers, hoping for a really ugly scene, like in the bad old days. What fun. Behind Cait, the agitated manager, a middle-aged woman in a blue and yellow smock with a large IKEA ID badge pinned to it, was madly gesturing, "No!" The panting young clerk, red-faced now, had reappeared and was trying to wrest the unit off the conveyor belt, but Cait maintained her vice-like grip on it. Tonda stood smirking to the side, loving it all. His final revenge on all the imagined insults his exile in Sweden had perpetrated on his person. The manager took Tonda aside and babbled in Czech. Tonda raised his hand in a helpless gesture, the universal, "Tell it to my wife" gesture. Cait kept repeating in English, "I am buying this goddamn piece of crap. Tell them in America they would have to sell it to me. They advertised a sale. We drove an hour to get here. I am not coming back here ever." Finally, after a three-way conference consisting of Tonda, the manager, and the cowering cashier, the manager stood back almost in tears and waved her hand in assent. Cait was able to drive home with a $10.99 storage unit and the feeling that she had defeated the entire post-Soviet faux capitalist economy. It was a positive omen. She could save her marriage. A week later, everything caved in. On the way back from visiting his sister and her family at their weekend cottage, Tonda began an irrational rant about his sister, then his ex-wife, then his mother. The traffic was bad and he tailgated recklessly, swearing all the time. By the time they arrived in Prague, Cait felt she had almost died at least 10 times. Tonda jumped out of the car and almost assaulted a driver who had usurped a parking place he coveted. And he spat on the sidewalk in front of a young Russian soldier begging for spare change at the entrance to their building. He continued his rant about his sister in the elevator. Apparently, he felt his sister had patronized him all weekend by not properly introducing him to her surrealist painter cronies they'd encountered at the local pub. Since the Velvet Revolution in 1989, she was becoming known in the outside world, now that she was free to sell her work in the West. Her long-delayed success rankled Tonda, Cait realized, though he never said as much. They unpacked and put away the leftover pickles and sausages, the mustard jar and heel of rye bread, and the jar of homemade pear preserves they had been gifted. All the while, Tonda was muttering about some filmmaker who had failed to recognize him last night at their local cafe, even though they'd been to school together in the early 60s in Prague. Cait suddenly turned and ordered Tonda to sit down. Shocked, he did. She sat next to him and picked up the Art Deco tile depicting a stylized pomegranate that they'd found at the flea market and used as a paperweight. She tossed it from hand to hand. She inhaled and hoped she could say everything in one long breath. Tonda, I don't love you anymore. You're mean to your kids, your sister, and your mother. You're rude to my friends in America. You have no friends of your own. You fight with our neighbors. You can't keep a job. I'm afraid of dying every time I sit next to you in a car. I don't even like you. I wouldn't choose you as a friend. So why should I be? Stop. Please stop. Color was visibly draining from his face. So why should I stay married to you? My life with you is hell. I don't think you love me anymore either. I actually wonder if you ever loved me or even like me now. And I am completely out of ideas. I admit defeat. He was silent for a moment. He sat uncharacteristically still, his hands twitching slightly. Cait stifled a faint stirring of pity. Dear wife, don't you think I know all that? But it's not my fault. Not his fault. Not his fault. That was the best he could do. Tonda, she tried to meet his eyes, but he looked away. All he had to do was ask for one more chance. He continued looking at his shoes. It was really over this time. Keeping Prague in her life was too high a price to pay for losing herself. She stood, walked to the bathroom, closed the door, and threw up. On the way to the airport, the cab driver, protesting the detour, reluctantly took Cait past the plaza where she and Tonda had rescued the fledgling Kestrel 10 years before. The puzzled driver took out his cigarettes and sat there smoking with the meter running, while Cait stood looking up at the facade of the recently cleaned building. A slight drizzle of rain slicked the cobblestones. Her yellow tights, the zoo, freedom in the air, the streets, the pubs, Russian soldiers sitting on gray blankets surrounded by useless medals that seemingly overnight had become emblems of shame. Those young soldiers wanted to stay, even knowing they would never be forgiven or accepted by the Czechs who had suffered so much for so long. Now it was Tonda's country again, and like those Russians, Cait would never belong. Maybe Tonda wouldn't either, but that he would have to find out for himself. So those are some scattered chapters, maybe a little hard to take in, not reading it, sequentially, but how are we doing? Oh, okay. I would love to take a few questions, thoughts, comments, anything.
Barbara, aside from the age milestone, your protagonist turning 40 and making a life decision, are there other major milestones in her life or that of the characters that drive the story?
Yes, I think when she turned 60, she realized she's given 20 years to this, and she has to calculate, as many of us do, the compromise, some good things, some company, turbulence, stress, excitement, or for another 20 years, or is it time to just say, I give up. I cannot help this person. I've tried everything. It's not my fault. Too much. I think what she began to realize is the post-traumatic stress from having grown up under first the Nazis and then the Russians was something she had dismissed because you're in America, you're free, everything's going to be fine. And this was a time when there wasn't so much talk about trauma and intergenerational stress. And so she had thought that she could help him put his trauma in the past. But when it kept reappearing, it was really, I think 40 and 60 were two milestones. 40 was I can change my life and I'm in control. And the 60 is, oh, how many years do I have left? How do I want to spend it? But when you grow up in a family that has stress, that becomes the script. That's kind of normal life. And so it doesn't seem unusual. It almost is something that you're addicted to, that craving. They call it your script, your family script, that if you don't have that excitement, you get bored, so that can be a real problem for people, I think. And there's a lot more talked and known about it now. The buzzwords that we use now, about, like I was at the addiction seminar that we had here, there are 10 family stressors that predict long-term mental health for children, and they can ask the children, they can now use them to predict health outcomes, obesity, suicide, addiction. And among them are divorce and, family violence, domestic violence. That wasn't even on the table as a conversation back then. It was much more, if you weren't in a nuclear family, then you were deficient in some way. And it was too bad. There's really nothing you could do about that. It was, as I think now, there was more divorce when I was growing up among my peers than they ever talked about. I thought I was one of the few. It turns out a lot of the kids, but no one wanted to talk about it because it was a stigma. Broken home, what a term, broken home. Didn't say, alternative home or co-parenting or, so we have made a lot of progress in that regard in terms of giving people tools to deal with. Everybody's got some kind of trauma, and but the one of, and we're now, of course, there's so much literature about people living in exile, migrants, and I myself have been an ESOL teacher working with people from Argentina and Haiti and places, and Russia, places where there's a lot of stress, and they learn English and then they get some chance to talk about it, but there isn't much chance really for them to process, not in the normal school setting. And there weren't even guidance counselors back in Florida where I was teaching. I would be by default a guidance counselor. But another kind of, and there's a lot of really, really good literature being written by women and men now, from Iran or Iraq or many other countries, Afghanistan, so many different African countries, so much good literature that we're reading. The publishing world is cracking open to be much more inclusive. But this particular kind of immigrant who is the educated white male is kind of, there's no focus on that so much. And since that was something I knew something about, I thought it would be interesting to look at that. Is kind of a forgotten, well, what's your problem? You have a profession, you're white, and yet trauma is trauma, and but I think what interests me, and there's so many cases of talented, intelligent women who are in dysfunctional relationships, and I'm particularly interested in that. Joni Mitchell's first husband criticized her all the time, told her she had no talent, she wasn't good at writing. Or Edna O'Brien's husband, she married an older German writer, again, was very, very critical of her writing. Her first royalty check, he took her money, basically, and she had to fight for custody of their two boys, so again and again and again, you can see really talented women. Maybe it's no accident because they're so talented. It's hard to have two talented people in a relationship, it's hard. But you think these are brilliant women. Why did they choose these partners? And that's a complicated question. No simple answer to that. But my book, The Girl Pretending to Read Rilke, is about a young woman in a science lab who's in she's young, so it's not like a lifelong decision, but she's in a weird relationship with an older student. And an old friend of mine who was a physicist said one of his female graduate students read it, and she was angry. Why did this woman, stay with this lousy guy? And then a week later, she said, I know why I was angry, because I've done the same thing. And I was thinking about myself, like it was too true to life, so. And I'm sure we all have known wonderful women. You say, why is she with that guy? So that maybe that will be an eternal question, but I'm very interested in that. Whenever I read about a really talented artist or writer or professional, and you read about some partner in their past who is so clearly a loser, that interests me, it will always interest me, I guess. Did you have a question?
I was thinking, I think a lot of it is ego with a man and a woman. The man's ego wants to be built, and if the
Sure.
wife is doing well
Yeah,
more than him, then he gets angry.
right. But why does the woman, sometimes it
Take
takes
it.
a long time for the woman to realize that she should leave, because plenty of men are very supportive of their wives.
Yeah.
Who's the mystery writer, most famous? The British mystery writer. What?
Louise
Agatha
Penny.
Christie. She had a really bad first marriage. She left it and disappeared for a little while, but then she remarried this fantastic archaeologist, and he was so supportive of her their whole lives, so she had a wonderful, long second marriage. And I know many women whose husbands are very supportive. They go to, book readings and, give them quiet time with the kids, away from the kids to write and stuff. So you can say, yes, it's ego for sure, but why do the women accept that treatment? Sometimes, it takes a while before you realize, wait a minute, this is going to keep happening. I know one woman she worked for years on her first book, and the night before her book launch at the bookstore, the reading, her husband asked her for a divorce the night before. And was out of the blue. He'd been having an affair, timing, right? So, you read about women who's have breast cancer or whatever, and their husbands are so supportive and so caring, or Alzheimer's. And then there are others who are so narcissistic. And is it just the luck of the draw? I don't like to generalize about anybody, but it seems like the more talented the woman, the harder it is for her to find a partner. I guess I should say. Maybe that's not a surprise. I was told when I was about 13, I had a very bright cousin, Mary Alice, in the Midwest, and they said, we've told Mary Alice she shouldn't get a master's degree because she'll never get a husband if she has a master's degree. So that was the late 50s. That was the kind of thing people said, right? Yeah. And I remember having a crush on a boy in high school, and I was pretty good at math, and he was in my math class. And one day he rushed to me and said, I got 100 on the trig test. And I didn't know what to say, because she had made a mistake in the grading. So she had to add 10 points to everybody, and I got 110. So I just said, oh, that's fantastic. I just like, and you read about STEM classes that the girls at age 12 or 13, they start dropping out, and they don't want to show that they like math or that they're good at math. That's changing. Thank goodness, thank goodness. Like today we had the I want to be a biologist thing at the library, but it wasn't the norm, when I was growing up. I don't know what on earth. I guess my parents were they treated me like a person, not like a boy or a girl, because it didn't occur to me that I had to change my profession based on my gender. I didn't make any connection to that. And I didn't even know that was weird. So, because I read now when people say, oh, girls in the 50s thought they had to be a teacher or a nurse or a homemaker. Do you have that kind of in your family?
Well, it was just me, and I guess it didn't make a difference to my
Did you
dad.
have some?
No, it didn't
what-
matter to him. He just wanted me to be educated so I could support myself.
Okay, that's good. And that was your dad who's in
Yeah,
prison? Yeah.
it was just a single parent. Yeah.
Okay, what was his work, kind of
He
work?
was, he had a trucking business,
Okay. Well, that was great because,
Yeah.
yeah,
so.
you know what, I'm finding just anecdotally that women who have fathers who are supportive do really well. And that's an important factor for them, the fathers being supportive, yeah, of their ambitions, you know. I think Malala had that also. Her father was extremely, always, you know, made that a priority for her.
So basically what you're saying, it's coming back from the family, it's coming from family roots.
Yep.
How you're interpreted as you grow. And then probably peer pressure as you go through the schools.
I don't know what's the most important. I don't know what the research shows. I do know that it takes at least one person who sees you and I had a teacher in junior high school who said, I want to read your book. We were supposed to write first chapters of our autobiographies. And she said, I think you could be a writer. And for me, that was exciting because you feel like your parents will always say good things, you know, but if the teacher says something, it doesn't take more than one person. I think it could be a pastor, a teacher. You know, that's why these big
Someone
brother,
outside the family.
yeah, these big brother and big sister programs, I think are really, really good that way. Do we have big brother, big sister in Millinocket? No.
Not that I know of.
I did that in San Francisco. And I was paired with a Russian girl of all things who had hated her stepfather, was really acting out, was about to go to reform school because she'd been caught driving around at night. They were shooting out tires of parked cars and stuff. And if she went to the big sister program, she wouldn't have to go to reform school. And we got along really well. The first thing I did was take her for an ice cream soda. Then I took her to a bookstore. It turned out she had a lot of poets in her family. And then I took her to the campus of San Francisco State just to show her a college. And she's like, oh, well, this is, you know. So, and we're still in touch, actually. She lives in San Francisco now. But it was hard in the beginning because she was, you know, but she just hated everything. So I really think the one-on-one mentoring is a good model. And it takes time. You have to build trust, you know. So maybe we could talk about getting something like that going, a big sister program, big brother program. You look skeptical. No, yeah. We need everything in Millinocket, a little bit of everything, yeah. Yeah. Any more thoughts? You've read my book, thank you very much. I have a copy for you as a thank you for coming. I brought of the first one, the published one. And that is about the young woman in a science lab trying to prove herself when there's a really bad family tragedy happens and she can't talk about it. And when I think about it, looking back now, it was amazing to me because I did go through that experience of being a summer intern in a lab, that there was no Me Too movement. There was no vocabulary for anything. You were just on your own, whatever, thrown into the whatever, and you had to swim. Yeah. So, but I still think science is a great area for women because basically scientists bond over their excitement, over their research. Really, they don't think about gender when they're looking at results, or they're excited about work. And it's very international. People cooperate globally, you know, and there's so much still to find out about everything. I think, and I'm really glad that there are all these STEM programs that are encouraging women. It was a hard decision for me. I actually saw a psychiatrist for a year before I decided to make the change. I said, I've been doing this. I put so many years into it. I feel like I'm leaving a nunnery, you know, who will I be? And yet when I spent the time writing, it just felt right. And even with the uncertainty of, you don't get grants if you're not a teacher or professor in an English department, it's hard to be independent as a writer, but I don't regret it at all. Not at all. But I'm still glad I have the science background because it permeates everything. I mean, we have to understand genetics now. We have to understand all these things. and so many more people. The level of understanding of a fifth grader is probably what we had in graduate school. You know, I mean, the information now has filtered down, which is great, I think. Yeah. Yeah. I marked. Do we have any questions in the chat, Nicole?
We have one comment. Pamela says, fascinating. I love it.
Okay. Now, Pamela is an actress. She's a friend I made in Florida and very talented actress. And we used to walk a lot together. She grew up in Alaska with a very complicated family background too. So I marked a couple of short passages in The Girl Pretending. Would you like to hear any more? Are you getting kind of tired at this point, or a quick one? Okay, they're kind of funny. I know this one, what I read was kind of serious. But let's see. I've done it. Here it is. You can see I've done a lot. The pink is for tonight. And the back is my dad and visiting me at Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire. That was, can you imagine wearing a suit and tie to visit your daughter at camp on a Sunday? I can't believe it. The 50s were insane. Did anybody here watch Mad Men? The series Mad Men? Yeah. That was the period. Lots of alcohol, cigarettes, and button-down suits. Okay, so picture a 19-year-old girl, her first day at her summer internship. She hasn't met her supervisor before. She's in Boston, and she's super nervous. Glasses are somewhere. Yes. So this book took me about 15 years to write, because I kept rewriting it because I wanted the right tone. And I think I finally hit the tone that I wanted. By the way, a comment that I finally realized, my narrators always seem to be slightly bumbling, unaware, and they're learning as they go. So I don't want them to be too smart. I want the reader to kind of identify, so they might seem like they should know more, but that's kind of on purpose, because I want the reader to follow along as the narrator learns more about whether it's Czech politics or something else. So it's kind of a on purpose, slightly simplified outlook. Of all the many names Felix had been called, and Felix is the supervisor. Of all the many names Felix had been called in his life, philanderer was not among them. When Bronwyn knocked timidly on the open door of his office that morning, he looked up from his desk and barely registered the fact that she was female. Like wild geese, he and his wife Paulette were mated for life, and he responded to other humans mainly in terms of how quickly they appreciated his quirky wit and not inconsiderable intelligence. So you say you're a chemistry major, but mainly interested in genetics? He wiggled around in his swivel chair, tapping his empty meerschaum pipe nervously on the stack of rough thesis straps that cluttered his desk and spilled onto the floor. Why? He stopped jiggling around to stare directly into her, as he now noticed pale blue eyes. She was about 19, he guessed. Trying not to let her eyes focus on the safety pin protruding from the hinge on the left side of Felix's glasses, Bronwyn attempted to return his gaze. To control her impulse to laugh, she frowned and looked down at her feet. They were unappealingly white in contrast to the dark leather of her old sandals. Would there be any time to get a tan this summer? She looked up again. Well, genetics because of the mystery. Chemistry because it's a necessary evil en route to answering the most interesting questions. A bit boring a lot of the time, granted, but it'll get me where I want to go. Understanding how one fertilized egg turns into a brain and feet and eyeballs. She was now composed enough to look right into his eyes, kind of googly behind his thick lenses. He was much younger than she'd expected and seemed to be kind of hyper. Excuse me, he looked down at a file folder in front of him. Bronwyn, that theoretical stuff is all well and good, but our kind of science is done by real people doing real experiments. Are you going to be willing to stay nights? Things like that. How late did you plan to stay today, for example? This isn't a 9 to 5 kind of operation we're running, you know? Cheeks flushing, Bronwyn summoned all her willpower to maintain eye contact with him. I realize that. I can stay till 11 if necessary. The last train for Cambridge leaves at 11:14. I don't have a car, but I intend to make good use of my time in the laboratory, and I'm grateful for the chance I've been given. It was going to be worse than everyone said. Oh, okay, that's the first day. So what happens is she makes a discovery that summer. She gets a chance to plan some of her own experiments, and her hunch turns out to be right. While Felix is away, she tests something. Her hunch was right. I won't go into all the details in the short reading, but it was her first time discovering something new that nobody else had seen the results yet. Bronwyn felt bodiless and weightless. She barely heard the conductor call out her stop, and she didn't even remember turning up her street or how she got into the apartment. It was pitch dark. When she finally turned on the hall light, she realized she'd forgotten all about the Harvard MIT annual softball jamboree. Thank God. That also meant Eric wouldn't be back until much later. It was strange not having anyone to tell about her discovery. She reminded herself that anyone could have carried out the experiment once it was suggested, but she had bothered to do it, and she'd done it carefully, and she knew. She could feel it in all her bones. Her finding was correct. She hugged the feeling to her. Part of her wanted to wallow in the sensation of private knowledge for as long as possible. Another part wanted to shout it from the rooftops. It was impossible to sleep. These feelings were utterly new to her. Was she a scientist now? Was there a line that you crossed? She had set her trap and snared her prey. She and nature were becoming bosom buddies, although actually it felt more like female mud wrestling. This was hard and scary. This wasn't like getting the right answer in a test. This was like falling through a hole in the surface of things, lifting the veil. So when I wrote this, it came out originally in 2000. There weren't any books about women doing science. And I was actually embarrassed to tell people what it was about. I'd sort of mumble, oh, she's interested in genetics and DNA. And I thought, and now, yeah, a lot. So I'm happy for that. But at the time, it took some guts to be writing about a woman who was interested in viruses. So, okay, this one is one of my favorite passages ever. I don't know about you guys, but there's a lot of competition between people in science and people in English and literature. And the people in literature can be very patronizing towards the scientists. They think they're kind of nerdy and klutzy. And the scientists think the lit majors are like phoning it in. It's too easy. And why bother with all of that? You know, so there's a lot of edginess about that. So Bronwyn, who loves books and poetry, she wanders into a bookstore in Harvard Square. The long walk to Harvard Square calmed her nerves somewhat and gave her a purpose. She's had some bad news. Before returning to the empty flat to make the unavoidable call to her mother in New York, she would buy a copy of Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet. That promised to be much easier going than the notebooks of Malte Lord's Brigga, his only novel. The bookstore clerk had never heard of this, but Bronwyn had discovered on Eric's bookshelf the week before. He, in turn, had inherited from the previous occupant of the flat, or so he claimed. Bronwyn wondered now if a female of Gina's ilk had left it there the preceding winter. When Bronwyn entered Grolier's, the middle-aged clerk, Grolier's is still there, by the way, in Cambridge. The middle-aged clerk, maybe the owner, sitting on a high wooden stool by the cash register, glanced up and then back down at his book. Snap judgment complete in a blink. He probably figured she'd wandered into the wrong place and would be gone in a few moments. Bronwyn lingered shyly by the door until she got her bearings. This is only her second time inside Cambridge's oldest and most prestigious used bookstore. All around her were unfamiliar treasures laid out in heaps on long tables or piled on sagging bookshelves. The large, bright room was roughly square with wide plate glass windows that fronted on the street and allowed passers-by a clear view of the interior. Most of the books were crammed in cases against the walls, while the owner's special favorites were displayed face up on the long tables and all-you-can-read buffet. Not very efficient use of space, but a welcome visual relief from the crowded aisles of the chain bookstores closer to the center of the square. In one corner was a lumpy green brocade armchair with the stuffing beginning to extrude. It was occupied by a young man sporting a fitful growth of beard, wearing a black t-shirt and sandals. He was rather ostentatiously holding a heavy volume on his lap and reciting one of its pages softly to himself. If Bronwyn squinted, she could make out the name W.B. Yeats in white on a blue dust jacket. Trying not to let her footsteps echo too loudly on the bare wooden floorboards, Bronwyn nervously approached the clerk. She was looking directly at the bald spot on his forward tilted head when she coughed. Yes, his head jerked upright. And please, for pity's sake, don't creep up on a person like that. Bronwyn was now close enough to see that he had been reading Madame Bovary in French. Do you have no, we don't have a restroom, not even for customers. That's not what I wanted to. I was wondering if you have, in mid-sentence, she panicked. She wanted to escape fast. Black t-shirt in the corner had lowered his book and was glaring at her. If you have Robert Lowell's Life Studies, she finished reading the first dust jacket that came into focus. The clerk was shocked, but recovered fast, revealing nicotine-stained teeth and an unexpectedly sweet smile. Why, yes, we do. An estate purchase just came in, as a matter of fact. He swiveled his rotund body around and plucked a slender volume from the top of the open cardboard carton, sitting on a huge cluttered desk just behind him. A fan, are you? I want to be. His honesty attracts me and his language, but sometimes he's so private. I know, and so unpredictable, uneven, but you'll like this one. It's a real change of pace, a breakthrough. And what luck to have a first edition. Do you need anything else? More Lowell? He lifted himself off the stool and began to bustle about, all his senses alert to the possibility of the first real sale of the week. Well, she timidly mentioned Rilke. Oh, Christ, yes, we're up to our yin-yangs in Rilke. Comparative lit major, are you? Before she knew it, he had stacked 4 more books on his counter, all smelling of fresh ink. She was going to have to write a check. The total was way over her budget, but they were as irresistible as boxes of candy. Now, black t-shirt there was no denying it, actively scowling in her direction. She took out her wallet. Alarm bells were beginning to sound deep down in her midbrain. No, actually, chemistry is. Black t-shirt stood up in his corner. For a moment, she thought he might hurl the heavy collected Yeats at her head. Chemistry? You won't understand Robert Lowell. Don't sell her those books. She won't understand a word. Literal-minded scientist snob. I had a physics teacher in high school who told me I was stupid, failed me. He was the stupid one. Robert Lowell, ha! As suddenly as he had begun, he sat down and resumed reading. Bronwyn stood stock still, mortified to the tips of every hair on her head. Sweat dripped down her back and chafed at the waistband of her jeans. Don't mind him. That's just Richard. He's harmless. You come back again and tell me how you like those books. Promise? And I took 10% off for quantity. He gave her the books in a sturdy dark blue bag emblazoned with the shop's logo in gold lettering, and then turned back to Emma Bovary. So being a scientist going into a bookstore buying poetry can be very traumatic. So Has anybody else felt that judgment by somebody who knows, who's scared, basically scared of what you know a lot about and attacks you? You know, it's like a defense mechanism. Has that ever happened to you?
With languages mostly, and I used to be a diplomat, and there are certain languages that are elevated over others. French, for instance, or, in some circles, Russian. But there are equally other easier languages that have just as many speakers of it that for some reason don't get the same praise.
Yeah, yeah. What's your native language?
I speak Spanish fluently.
You speak
Yeah.
Spanish fluently. Okay, yeah. I grew up in New York when there was a big influx of people from Puerto Rico, and there was a West Side Story is based on that clash of cultures then. And I know Cuban emigres. My best friend from junior high school his parents were Cubans, and they came over in 57. And the breadth of literature in Spanish is breathtaking, and the beauty of it, you know. So, I mean, the French have a problem. I think there's snobbery, like, I don't know, do other languages that have that same issue? I mean, I read that in Canada at one point, I don't know if it's still true, or maybe in Montreal, they only have French in their bookstores or something. Maybe they've changed that now, but yeah. I kind of understand it in a way too. You want to preserve, you're afraid your culture will disappear, you know, but I like being in a culture with as many languages as possible. I love that. Actually, I miss that about New York City, that diversity. And I love, I've been to Montreal, not very often, but I love that they'll speak to you with a mixture of French and English at the same time. I like that. Yeah. But I have found that my whole life. And there was a book called The Two Cultures by C.P. Snow, which is about the unnecessary clash and division between art and science. And I think, again, there's been a lot more talk about the beauty of physics, and, you know, that physics as poetry, and that it's not rational to separate fields of knowledge so drastically that they can each elevate and contribute to understanding of the other. But that was actually also a time when science was respected. Now we have a problem with it even being respected, much less segregated from the arts. It's like, it's very puzzling to me, because when I grew up, Sputnik had just appeared and all the boys wanted to be engineers, but I got a scholarship to graduate school based on our country's interest in science and research. And why did it reverse? You know, because so many good things have come out of that. The polio vaccine that he gave away free, he didn't even patent it, you know. Does anybody have a thought about why this country became anti-science or afraid of science? I don't know if we're anti-science, but when did it start? I don't know, it's a puzzle to me. These things can happen gradually. It's like putting a frog, you know, in cold water and then turning up the heat slowly. How do you boil a frog, you know? It gradually, distrust of authority, distrust of knowledge.
I'm not sure. I think everything's upside down.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have 2 comments.
Any comment?
No, we have 2 comments in the chat.
Okay.
Dolores said hi. Just wanted to let you know that your commerce buddy is listening.
Oh, wonderful. My good friend from high school.
And then Carol said, thanks for the amazing readings. Your remarkable gift for creating dialogue, your wit, and your absolutely intriguing narrative drifts are a true pleasure to encounter in your live voice.
Oh, thank you, Carol. My roommate from Brandeis, and she wound up being the chairman of French Lit at Yale. So she's a really good reader, and we're in touch over the phone. You know, it's amazing when you resume a friendship after years, and it's like you never dropped a stitch. You know, that's wonderful. Well, wish me luck with the publisher. I'm at a publisher now that I'm really hopeful about. It's a university publisher, and the man reading it is longtime editor and kind of my generation. Sometimes I think that it's kind of hopeless sending it out to younger readers and editors who just don't care about the issues I care about, or I'm trying to connect the past and the present. I'm not in favor of dwelling in the past by any means, but when you've lived a long time and seen a lot of ups and downs, you'd like to try to connect the dots, and it helps you stay hopeful too, actually. Because I think overall, we've had some reverses. I believe that the Supreme Court decision was a reversal, but overall, things are better than they were in the 50s. We can talk about race relations. We can talk about gender issues, women's rights, things that we couldn't even talk about. We haven't solved everything, but we know there are problems, and many things are better. That's what I think. So if you just look at the last few years, you can get very upset, but then I'm known for being glass half full. So, but we have had some good news in the past week, right? With the climate bill. I think that seems really positive, and I had thought it was dead in the water, and then the referendum in Kansas, so personally, I think it's the only way to live. I think that's how I survived a slightly traumatic childhood, is somehow looking for I'm the person, if you see the horse stung under the tree, I'll say, where's the pony? So, but that's, not a bad way to live, as long as you don't then buy all the equipment for the pony and the saddle, and then have no money left for food, right? When there's no pony. Yeah. So.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I would like to give you a book as a thank you for
Yeah.
coming, and I'll sign your book too.
Yeah, you'll have to let us know.
I will, for sure. Oh my
The friends
gosh.
at the
I'll
library
be
don't
flying
know.
a flag
Okay.
from the roof if I get a publisher. That's the hard part. You have
Make
to,
sure it's the right color.
yeah, right. You have to be willing to subsidize yourself for years and years,
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, I'll never be bored. I'll never have to worry about retiring. I have projects to last me to the last second of my life, so. And I've got one that takes place in Maine that I'm working on now too. So that's exciting. Yeah. I'll have to do it under a pseudonym. The town is too small. But that's one reason I came, because, I've lived in London, I lived in Prague, I've lived on the West Coast, the East Coast. I wanted new material. I didn't want to keep going over the old material. And Maine is a challenge in many ways. It's fantastic. I love it. But it's a whole nother planet, And I have so much more understanding of the issues, the political issues that are current now, heating an old home is not an abstract concept anymore. Things like that. The price of oil. I pay attention to the price of oil, things that just, for certain coastal elites, they just aren't on the radar, Yeah. So you have to earn that. I think I'm getting all kinds of interesting input, and I think I've earned it, because it's not easy. You guys in Maine, I have so much respect for people carving out a life in Maine. It's not easy, really not easy, but I love it. Are you a Mainer?
I'm a Mainer,
Okay.
yes, but my son is currently in California and grew up here, and says that if anyone asks where he's from, he says Siberia.
Yeah. What part of California is he in?
Hmm?
What part of California is he?
I'm trying to think, the beach, Hillington Beach, is it?
Huntington Beach?
No, Huntington Beach, yes, thank you. That awful, I can't even remember. Yeah,
My daughter is in Los Angeles now. She was born in San Francisco, but she grew up.
Yeah.
And she's,
loves it there.
yeah, yep. But no, Maine, I love Maine. So I just hope I can afford to stay. Who thought that would be an issue, Like, it's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. And
Thank you.
yeah, it was a pleasure and a privilege. So let's see. Books are over there.